In episode 3 of Practical Applications for Combat Sports S&C, we move away from performance testing and we start to look into what to look for and then what to test. Now, the first point that comes to mind is what most S&C coaches will be familiar with if you're working with athletes, whether individual or team, will be something called a needs analysis. Now, a needs analysis is just a breakdown of either the sport, the athlete, and there's a couple of ways to do this. I've took some notes again just to give some examples, but needs analysis of the sport first off, both to identify some biomechanical and physiological requirements. So from a movement perspective, is the lateral movement in the sport, is it performed in different planes, so frontal plane, sagittal plane, transverse plane, etc. Is it single leg dominant, is it bilateral, double leg dominant? The list could go on there. From a physiological perspective, is it predominantly anaerobic? Is it predominantly aerobic? Is it a mixture of both? Again, just looking down that route and deciding what the athlete might need from a sporting perspective. The second point we need to take into consideration relates back to a previous video from episode 1, where we talked about communication between the S&C practitioner and the skills/technical coach. What the communication might provide for you as a practitioner in determining some testing to be performed. If the athlete and skills coach may bring attention to certain attributes that may need to be improved upon. So an example, what I've took is the skills coach, maybe from a previous fight, reveals that the fighter was gassed out maybe after the first or second round. This could give you, as the S&C coach, the indication that testing may be more driven towards aerobic-based testing or anaerobic-based testing, and this might give you more of a foundation of where you need to work from. Again, we can use the testing once it's performed to either back up what the coach has said, or maybe give them a little bit more, or give them a little bit more information of, okay, we've tested this from a objective measurements and we found that this athlete is good at such and such, or this athlete is not so good at such and such. Okay, do they need to work on their aerobic base? Is testing showing otherwise, just like we just gone over? What this also might bring is skills coach may provide a certain task to be worked on, what I wrote down as such, as they want their fighter to be more offensive, so more of the aggressor in the fight, or they want to increase speed, so they want to increase the power during that bout. Again, this could dictate what is also being tested and what is also being developed during the strength and conditioning program. And the final point I wanted to talk about here is based on once we've performed the testing and we've gathered the information, how can this direct our programming, or what can we look further into based on the results from the testing? I've tried to keep the points a little bit more short and concise, as the videos can get a little bit long-winded. So this is the reason why I've picked maybe 3 of the top ones I think that might be focused on from this. There might be more, but we'll focus on these for now. A practical example I've used 2, so again, keeping that practical application scheme going. Lower body strength testing for a fighter reveals that their 3 rep max is the same as their body weight. Okay, so an example of a trap bar deadlift for a 70 kilo fighter reveals that their 3 rep max is also 70 kilos. Now, what we know is that there is limited research on what is ideal when it comes to strength. How strong is strong enough? But what we can use is subjective observation as a coach. Yeah. And the coach's eye can quickly reveal that this athlete may need to work on their force production, their ability to produce force. If an athlete isn't able to push past their own body weight on a certain movement, such as the trap bar deadlift, where people do tend to lift quite high loads, then this may be the focal point for the programming from a strength perspective. Vice versa, a personal example, when I've worked with an athlete in the past, is identifying how close together their squat jump and counter movement jump was. When we looked at some research from Alan Ruddock and Dave Hembra, which I think are from Boxing Science if I'm not mistaken, their data revealed that a lack of ability in the eccentric utilization, so the ability to absorb or utilize the eccentric portion of a movement, could affect the force transfer during a punch. So they determined that when a squat jump and a counter movement jump is pretty close in terms of results, this may reveal that. So direction towards developing the ability for the fighter to utilize eccentric utilization, improve on that, could have a direct transfer to improving their force output or force transfer. So in summary, we have 3 points that we focused on, which the first one was performing a needs analysis on the sport and probably the athlete. Number 2 was communication between you and the skill coach may bring out certain key performance indicators that the athlete may need to work on based on previous performances or performance and training that the coach is observing or the S&C coach is observing, i.e. lack of strength, lack of aerobic base, etc. The final point is, once we have performed the testing and we gathered the information, how can this direct our training program? And we pretty much touched on it with the previous point, i.e. lack of strength, lack of aerobic base, etc. One thing I did want to touch on a little bit was, if there is loads of things to focus on during performance testing results, and you find that the athlete may need to work on aerobic, strength, power, etc., then you probably need to find the biggest rock that might have the biggest carryover to the athlete and increasing their performance. More often than not, if you find a lot of things arising from the performance testing that may bring some uncertainty to the athlete's ability, then you might just have an athlete whose previous training experience is pretty zero. So again, from there, what can you do in terms of programming to elevate their ceiling or bring their foundation up to a point where in future you can start to work on maybe more complex methods if needs be.